Daniel had always been a man who believed in hard work. Since his teenage years, he worked wherever he could find a chance. Sometimes he repaired fences for neighbors, sometimes he helped old ranchers look after their cattle, and sometimes he took part-time shifts at local shops just to save a little extra money. Life was never easy for him, but he had learned how to survive with patience and hope. The one dream that stayed close to his heart was owning a farm of his own somewhere peaceful, with open fields, clear skies, and a quiet life that could give him comfort. When Daniel finally gathered enough money to buy a piece of land, it felt like a miracle. He had been saving for years, keeping every small amount he could manage. The farm he found was not new or modern. It was an old, abandoned property on the outskirts of a small town. Most people didn't want it because it needed a lot of work. The buildings were worn out, the fences were broken, and the barn looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. But for Daniel, it was still full of possibilities. He could already imagine cattle in the fields, fresh crops growing in the soil, and himself waking up every morning to the sound of nature. When he signed the papers and officially became the owner, he felt proud but also nervous. He had spent all his savings on this dream. If anything went wrong, he would have nothing left to fall back on. Still, he believed that the farm was worth every risk. He moved in on a warm afternoon, carrying a few bags and a heart full of excitement. The town people watched him with curious eyes. Some nodded, wishing him luck. Others whispered doubts to each other, and a few shared quiet warnings, saying the old farm had strange stories attached to it. Daniel didn't let the whispers bother him. Every old place had stories. People loved to exaggerate. He told himself not to worry, and started working on the land as soon as he arrived. The fields were covered in tall, dry grass, but he could still see the shape of their original beauty. He cut down the overgrown areas, cleared the weeds, and repaired the small farmhouse so he could live in it comfortably. The work was tiring and slow, but he enjoyed every moment. Every nail he hammered, every tool he lifted, made him feel connected to his dream. The barn, however, was a different challenge. It was the largest structure on the land, tall and wide, with old wooden beams and dusty corners that seemed untouched for decades. From the outside, it looked stable enough, but Daniel knew he would need to check the inside before using it. On his second week at the farm, he decided it was time to take a proper look. Entering the barn felt like stepping into a different world. The air was cooler, carrying the smell of old wood and dry hay. Dust floated gently in the sunlight that entered through small cracks in the roof. Daniel looked around with interest. There were old tools hanging on the walls, broken barrels stacked in one corner, and long ropes lying tangled on the floor. He walked slowly, studying everything, trying to imagine what the place must have looked like when it was full of life many years ago. Halfway through his inspection, he heard something unusual. It wasn't loud. It wasn't frightening. It was more like a soft, rhythmic thump. Steady, slow, and almost hidden in the silence. At first he thought it was just the wind pushing against the wooden panels, but the sound felt different. It was too regular, too patterned. Daniel paused, listening carefully. The sound seemed to come from above, from the upper floor of the barn. He looked up at the wooden loft that stretched across the inside of the building. It was supported by thick beams, with a ladder leading up to it. The loft looked dusty and darker than the rest of the barn. Daniel tilted his head, confused. Why would anything be up there? He had assumed the loft would be empty. The previous owner never mentioned anything unusual. Daniel placed his hand on the ladder. It felt old but still strong enough to hold his weight. He climbed a few steps, still listening for the sound. Another faint thump came again, slow and deep, almost like something large shifting slightly. He stopped climbing and stepped back down. Even though he wasn't scared, he didn't want to explore the loft when it was getting late. The barn was big, and exploring unknown places in low light didn't feel wise. Instead of climbing further, he walked out of the barn and stood outside in the warm afternoon breeze. He looked at the building thoughtfully. Maybe it was nothing, just a loose board or an old rope swinging. But the sound didn't feel random. Something about it stayed in his mind. That night, after finishing dinner, Daniel sat by the window of his small farmhouse. The sky outside was dark, lit by stars that looked brighter than anything he had seen in the city. Life on the farm had a peaceful charm, but the memory of the strange sound from the barn kept returning to his thoughts. He told himself he would check again in the morning when there was more daylight. If something was up there, he needed to know. If nothing was there, he could finally stop thinking about it. The next morning, Daniel woke up early. The sky was light blue, the air fresh and cool. He grabbed a flashlight, even though the day was bright, because the loft looked dark on the inside. After feeding the few animals he had and finishing his morning routine, he walked straight towards the barn. As he pushed open the barn doors, the inside looked calm and quiet. The dust in the air danced in the sunlight, the same way it had yesterday. Daniel stepped inside carefully, paying close attention to every sound. For a moment, he heard nothing unusual. Maybe the sound really had been nothing, but he knew he had to check properly. He approached the ladder again. This time, he took a deep breath and started climbing with steady steps. The higher he went, the darker the loft became. Once he reached the top, he stood on the wooden platform and looked around. At first glance, everything looked ordinary: dusty hay, old planks, and thick cobwebs stretched between the beams. Then he saw something that made him freeze. In the far corner of the loft, he noticed a large shadow. Not the shadow of wood or tools, but something shaped differently: long, wide, and still. Daniel narrowed his eyes, trying to understand what he was seeing. He slowly raised his flashlight, aiming the beam toward the dark corner. The moment the light touched the shape, Daniel felt a shock run through him. Hanging from thick ropes tied to the overhead beams was a huge figure, far larger than any human he had ever seen. It was the shape of a girl, with long hair falling over her shoulders, her head resting forward as if she was unconscious. Her arms and legs were gently swinging, as though a soft breeze had touched them. She wasn't hanging loosely or dangerously. It looked like someone had carefully placed her there, almost as if they wanted to hide her. Daniel's heart pounded, but not out of fear, out of confusion and disbelief. He took a step closer, shining the flashlight on her face. Her features were calm, peaceful, almost gentle. Her size was impossible to understand. She looked like a human girl, only many times bigger. He didn't know what to think. Was she real? Was she alive? How long had she been there? Daniel slowly moved forward, trying not to make any sudden sounds. He lifted his flashlight again to look more closely at her chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he saw the soft, steady rise and fall of her breathing. She was alive. Daniel stepped back, trying to understand what he had just discovered. The strange sound he had heard yesterday suddenly made sense. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an old board. It was her breathing, deep and rhythmic, echoing through the quiet barn. The questions began to fill his mind. Who was she? Why was she here? Who tied these ropes? Were they planning to come back? He knew nothing yet. But one thing was clear. His peaceful new farm held a secret far larger than he could have imagined. Daniel stood in the loft for a long moment, unable to take his eyes off the giant girl hanging gently from the ropes. His mind was full of questions he could not answer. He felt surprised, confused, and strangely calm at the same time. Even though the situation was unusual, nothing about the girl looked dangerous. Her face looked peaceful, almost innocent, like someone who had been sleeping for a long time. He stepped a little closer, careful not to make the old wooden planks creak too loudly. He slowly reached out his hand but stopped halfway. He didn't want to touch her without understanding the situation better. Instead, he circled around her, studying the ropes. They were tightly tied, thick enough to hold her weight, and looked newer than the rest of the barn. This meant someone had been here recently. Someone must have climbed up, tied her, and then left. But who, and why? Daniel took a deep breath and looked around the loft again. There were no footprints in the dust except his own. No tools or bags that someone might have dropped. No sign of a struggle. Everything was quiet and still. The girl's hair hung down in soft waves, reaching halfway to the floor. Her clothes were simple, made of soft fabric that looked handmade. She didn't look harmed or injured. From her calm breathing, Daniel could tell she was simply unconscious or sleeping. He gently cleared his throat, unsure if he should try calling out to her. "Hello?" he whispered softly. There was no response. The girl did not move or open her eyes. Daniel lowered his flashlight, thinking carefully. He knew he couldn't leave her up there hanging like that. It didn't feel right. She was alive, and she needed help. But he also knew freeing someone of her size would not be easy. The ropes were strong, and the loft floor was small. If she fell or slipped, she could get hurt, and he could too. He walked back down the ladder to think. When he reached the ground floor of the barn, he sat on a bale of hay, running his hands through his hair. The morning sunlight shone through the wooden slits, forming bright lines on the dusty floor. The quietness of the barn gave him space to think. He had moved here for a peaceful life, a slow, simple life. Yet somehow, on his brand new farm, he had discovered something extraordinary, something no one would ever expect. After a few minutes of silent thinking, Daniel stood up. He knew he couldn't ignore her. Whoever she was, she needed help. And he was the only person here. He went to his tool shed beside the barn and looked for something that could cut the ropes. He found a sharp, strong knife and tucked it safely in his pocket. He returned to the barn, climbed the ladder again, and stood in front of the girl. He looked at her face again before doing anything. Her expression was calm and soft. Even though she was huge compared to an ordinary human, there was a delicate gentleness in her features that made Daniel feel less nervous. He carefully touched one of the ropes to check its weight and thickness. The rope was strong but smooth, almost new. It made him wonder even more about who had brought her here. The idea that someone could tie up a girl her size made him uneasy. Yet he pushed the thought aside. Right now, his focus was on getting her down safely. He started by cutting the rope around her arms. He moved slowly, making sure she did not slip or swing suddenly. When the first rope loosened, she moved slightly, but Daniel quickly stabilized her by holding her shoulder. Surprisingly, her skin felt warm, like any normal person's. He cut another rope, then another, until only the final rope above her remained. This one was tied to the main beam of the loft. Daniel took a deep breath before cutting it. He supported her weight as much as he could and let the rope loosen gently. Slowly, very slowly, the giant girl's body leaned forward until her feet touched the wooden floor of the loft. She did not fall. Instead, she settled softly against the wall, still asleep. Daniel stepped back, impressed at how smooth it all went. He checked her face again, and then her breathing. Everything seemed normal. He crouched beside her and tried calling out again. Just a little louder. "Can you hear me?" Still no answer. For a moment, Daniel wondered if he should wait for her to wake up on her own, or try gently shaking her shoulder. After thinking carefully, he chose the gentler option. He placed his hand on her arm and gave a soft, slow push. The giant girl's eyelashes fluttered. Daniel froze, watching as she slowly began to wake. Her breath changed rhythm, and her head lifted slightly. She opened her eyes just a little at first, blinking against the dim light of the loft. Her gaze wandered helplessly for a moment until it finally rested on Daniel. Her eyes widened slightly, not in fear but in confusion. She looked around, touching her arms where the ropes had been removed, then looked back at Daniel. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft, gentle, and surprisingly calm for someone waking up in such a strange place. "Where am I?" she whispered. Daniel swallowed, unsure how to answer. "You're on my farm, in my barn. I found you here." The girl looked down at herself, then at the loft floor, then at Daniel again. She seemed embarrassed, confused, and unsure of what to say next. She lifted a hand to her head as if trying to remember something. I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said softly. "You're not causing trouble," Daniel replied gently. "I just want to understand what happened." Who tied you here? Did someone bring you? The girl looked away for a moment, her expression heavy with thought. She shook her head slowly. I was hiding, she said quietly. Then some people found me. They didn't want me to leave. I think they were planning to come back. Daniel felt his heart tighten slightly. He didn't want to push her too hard. She was still waking up, still trying to understand everything. He softened his voice. Do you know your name? The girl nodded slowly. My name is Leah. Daniel repeated it in his mind. Leah. A simple name for such an extraordinary person. He noticed she looked weak, as if she had been tied there for a long time. He knew she needed water. Maybe food. Maybe rest. He stood up and offered her support by gently placing his hand near her arm. Can you stand? If not, take your time. Leah nodded again. With slow, careful movements, she lifted herself from the floor. Her size made the loft look small, but she moved with surprising gentleness, making sure not to shake the old wooden boards too much. Daniel guided her to the ladder, and together they managed to bring her down safely. He let her rest on a bundle of hay while he brought water for her. She drank it gratefully, her eyes softening as she felt more awake. Daniel sat across from her, giving her space. Do you feel better? He asked. Leah nodded. Thank you. You helped me. Daniel smiled lightly, shaking his head. Anyone would have helped. Leah looked at him carefully. No, not everyone helps someone like me. Her words held a quiet sadness, one that made Daniel wonder what her life had been like before this moment. He didn't ask more questions. He sensed she needed time. He simply sat with her in the quiet barn, letting her breathe, letting her feel safe. The barn felt different now, still old, still dusty, but filled with a sense of calm connection. For Daniel, this discovery was nothing he had ever imagined. For Leah, it was the first time in a long time she felt even a small amount of trust. Both of them knew their lives had just changed, though neither fully understood how much. Daniel sat quietly on the hay bale opposite Leah, watching her slowly regain her strength. The morning sun had climbed higher, and soft light filled the barn, wrapping everything in a warm glow. After drinking water, Leah looked calmer, though her eyes still carried a tired sadness. Daniel felt there was a long story behind that look, one he needed to understand, but only when she was ready to share it. He didn't want to rush her. He knew that whatever had brought her here must have been hard, so he let the silence sit between them, gentle and unpressured. Eventually, Leah took a deep breath and looked at Daniel with honest eyes. You must have questions, she said quietly. Daniel nodded but smiled gently. Only when you feel ready to answer. His kindness surprised her. She had expected fear, or judgment, or too many questions. Instead, she saw patience, true patience that made her feel safe enough to speak. She ran her fingers over the hay beside her, gathering her thoughts. I wasn't always running, she began softly. Before all this, I lived far from towns and cities. I lived quietly, away from people, because, well, you can see I'm different. Oh, Daniel nodded. Leah was indeed different, a giant compared to ordinary humans, but her presence felt gentle, not frightening. I grew up near a small forest, she continued. My family lived there peacefully. We didn't bother anyone. People rarely saw us. My mother always said the world outside might not understand someone like me. She wanted us to stay hidden. Daniel listened closely, imagining the quiet life she must have had. For a long time, it was normal, Leah said. I didn't mind staying away from people. I had my family, the forest, the streams, the open sky. Everything felt safe. But things changed as I grew older. I started to wonder what was beyond the forest. I wanted to see the world for myself. I wasn't trying to do something wrong. I just wanted to walk where others walk, see what others see. Her expression softened, remembering the excitement she felt back then. So, one day, she continued, I left for a short journey. I thought it would be simple. I thought I could walk at night and hide during the day. But people noticed me sooner than I expected. Daniel could picture it, a girl of her size walking even carefully would still draw attention. At first, she said, some people were just curious. They kept their distance but stared from far away. I didn't want to scare them, so I stayed quiet and tried to hide. But then others saw me. People who didn't see me as someone new or different. They saw me as a problem. Daniel's heart felt heavy. He didn't need details to understand. Fear often made people treat what they didn't understand unkindly. They began to follow me, Leah said gently. They didn't hurt me, but they wanted to control me. They said someone like me shouldn't be wandering around. They thought I didn't belong anywhere near them. I tried to explain that I didn't want trouble. I even said I would go back home. But they didn't listen. She took a slow breath, her voice steady but sad. I ran. I hid wherever I could. But it's not easy for someone my size to disappear. People kept noticing, kept following. I moved farther and farther away from home, until I didn't even know where I was anymore. Daniel leaned forward slightly, giving her his full attention. Leah continued, that's when I found this area, this old farm. It was quiet and empty. I thought nobody came here. It felt safe for the first time in months. So I stayed near the barn, hiding in the shadows. Sometimes I would come inside during the night just to get shelter from the weather. I never touched anything. I just needed a place to breathe. Daniel imagined her quietly sitting in the darkness of his barn long before he even bought the place. It made him wonder how long she had been suffering alone. But one night, Leah said softly, a group of people arrived. I don't know how they found me. Maybe someone saw me earlier. They came quietly while I was sleeping. I woke up to whispers and footsteps. Before I could understand what was happening, they had tied me with ropes. They said they needed time to figure out what to do with me. They weren't angry, just unsure. But I was scared. I didn't want anyone to take me somewhere I didn't understand. Daniel felt a deep sympathy rise inside him. Her story wasn't violent or dramatic, it was just full of loneliness and misunderstanding. She never meant harm. Yet she had been treated like a problem. They tied me securely, Leah said with a small sigh. Then they left. I think they planned to return when they had help, or maybe when the sun rose. I tried to stay calm. I knew I couldn't break the ropes easily without hurting myself. So I waited. And then, everything went dark. I must have fainted because the next thing I remember is you cutting the ropes. Her eyes met Daniel's, soft with gratitude. I woke up thinking I would see those people again, she whispered. But instead, it was you. You didn't run. You didn't judge. You helped me. Daniel felt a gentle warmth in his chest. Anyone would have done the same. Leah shook her head slowly. No, not everyone. Most people fear what they don't understand. Daniel didn't argue. He knew she wasn't wrong. He looked at her thoughtfully. You're safe here, he said softly. I don't know much about your life yet, but I know you didn't choose to be treated unfairly, and you don't have to run anymore. Not while you're with me. Leah looked surprised, almost emotional. Why would you help someone like me? Daniel smiled gently. Because you're someone who needs help. That's enough. The barn remained quiet for a moment as Leah absorbed his words. For someone who had been alone for so long, trust didn't come easily. But Daniel's simple sincerity touched a place in her heart that had been empty for too long. Daniel stood and brushed off his hands. You need food, he said lightly. I don't have giant-sized meals, but I can find something. Leah gave a small, shy smile. Anything will help. Daniel walked out of the barn and returned with fruits, vegetables, and a jug of water. He placed them near her, and she thanked him sincerely. She ate slowly, politely, careful not to break anything or move too suddenly. Daniel watched with quiet amazement. Even though she was enormous, she behaved more gently than many people he knew. Over the next hour, they talked. At first, their conversation was careful and slow. But as they spoke more, both began to relax. Daniel learned that Leah loved watching sunsets, listening to running water, and learning about people even though she rarely met any. Leah learned that Daniel had lost his parents young and had worked hard for this farm all on his own. As they shared little pieces of their lives, something soft and warm grew between them, a quiet understanding, a gentle trust. Hours passed without either of them noticing. The barn no longer felt heavy with fear or secrets. Instead, it held two people who had found each other unexpectedly, one needing safety and the other needing purpose. For the first time in a long while, Leah felt seen not as something strange but as someone real. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt he wasn't alone on his farm. Neither of them said it aloud, but both felt the same thing inside their hearts. Maybe meeting each other was not an accident at all. Maybe it was the beginning of something meaningful, something that would change both of their lives forever. The next few days on the farm felt different for Daniel. Before meeting Leah, the farm had been quiet and lonely, filled only with the sounds of wind, animals, and his own footsteps. But now, there was a gentle presence in the barn that made everything feel warmer. Leah stayed mostly inside during the day, resting and recovering her strength. Daniel brought her food, water, and anything else she needed. He repaired the barn roof to make sure no sunlight or rain disturbed her. The farm slowly began to feel alive. Leah tried her best not to be a burden. She helped Daniel with whatever tasks she safely could. Because of her size, she stayed careful, always watching where she stepped, always making sure she didn't break or damage anything. Sometimes she helped Daniel move heavy logs or large hay bales, things that used to take him hours but took her only a few minutes. Daniel smiled every time she helped, though he told her she didn't need to do any of it. For Leah, helping was her way of saying thank you. During evenings, when the sky turned soft shades of orange and pink, Daniel would sit just outside the barn, and Leah would sit inside, near the wide-open doors, where she fit comfortably. They talked about simple things, life, memories, dreams, and everything in between. Daniel learned that Leah loved stars. She said that the night sky made her feel less alone. Daniel admitted that the stars were the one thing he used to talk to when life felt too heavy. One evening, while they watched the sky grow darker, Leah asked quietly, "Daniel, what will happen when people find out I'm here?" Daniel had wondered the same thing many times, but he hadn't wanted to worry her. He turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "We don't have to do anything right away," he said gently. "Right now, you're safe. And until we know what's best, we'll keep it that way." Leah lowered her gaze. "I don't want to cause trouble. I don't want people to think I'm dangerous." "You're not," Daniel replied immediately. His tone was soft but firm. "Anyone who actually meets you would see that." "But they won't," Leah whispered. "Most people don't see first. They imagine first, and their imagination can make them afraid." Daniel understood. The world wasn't always kind to what it didn't understand. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He simply looked at her face, calm, yet weighed down by worry. "You're not alone anymore," he said at last. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." A soft breath of relief escaped Leah's lips. She smiled, a real, gentle smile that reached her eyes. Daniel felt a quiet warmth at the sight. The following days continued peacefully. Daniel fixed things around the farm while Leah, still cautious, helped when she could and rested when she needed. She grew stronger, her eyes brighter than before. She wasn't hiding in fear anymore. She was recovering, healing, and beginning to feel like she belonged somewhere. One afternoon, Daniel was repairing the fence near the barn when he heard a soft humming coming from inside. He paused to listen. Leah was humming, a simple tune, gentle and calming. It was the first time he had heard her sing anything. He smiled to himself and continued his work, feeling a rare happiness settle into his heart. But not everything stayed quiet. On the third evening, just as the sun dipped low, Daniel heard distant voices. Not close but not too far either. He looked toward the dirt road leading to his farm. A few figures were walking slowly, talking to each other. They seemed to be people from the nearby town, maybe passing by, maybe curious. Daniel felt a sudden rush of worry. He hurried to the barn and found Leah sitting quietly. "Leah," he said softly. "Some people are nearby. They're not coming here yet. But just in case, you should stay quiet." Leah nodded immediately, though her eyes showed a hint of fear. Daniel gave her a reassuring look before stepping outside again. The people passed by without entering the farm. They didn't stop. They didn't look toward the barn. After a few minutes, they disappeared into the distance. Daniel let out a deep breath of relief and returned to Leah. "They're gone," he said. Leah relaxed, but the fear in her eyes didn't disappear completely. "I don't want you to lose your farm because of me," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "My farm is not more important than someone's safety. But you worked so hard for it," she reminded him gently. "And I'll work hard again if I have to." Daniel replied softly. "What matters is that you're safe, and you're not alone." Leah looked at him for a long moment, her eyes warm. She didn't know how she had been lucky enough to meet someone like Daniel. Someone who chose kindness over fear. She had never experienced such honesty and care before from anyone outside her family. The next morning, Leah made a decision. She waited until Daniel entered the barn with breakfast. "Daniel," she said softly, "I think it's time for me to move on." His heart dropped. He put the basket of food down slowly. "Move on?" he asked carefully. Leah nodded. "I don't want people to find me here. I don't want to bring trouble to you. You've helped me so much. I don't want anything bad to happen because of me." Daniel looked at her for a moment, trying to understand the emotion rising inside him. It wasn't just worry or sadness, it was the fear of losing someone who had filled a quiet space in his life he hadn't realized was empty. "Leah," he said softly, "leaving won't make you safer. You'll be alone again. You'll be hiding again. You'll be running from people who don't understand you." "I've been alone before," she said with a gentle smile. "I can handle it." Daniel stepped closer, his voice steady but full of meaning. "But you don't have to be alone anymore." Leah's eyes widened. She didn't expect those words. Daniel wasn't someone who spoke carelessly. He meant every word he said. "You're not a burden," he continued. "You're not unwanted. You're part of this place now. And I don't want you to leave." Leah felt her heart tighten gently. She had spent so long believing she didn't belong anywhere. And now, someone was telling her she did. "It's just," she whispered, "I'm scared of being the reason you lose everything." Daniel shook his head. "I've already gained more than I ever expected because of you. My farm feels alive because of you. My days feel meaningful. I don't want to go back to the quiet before you came." Leah blinked softly, her eyes shining. "What if people find out?" she asked quietly. Daniel took a slow breath. "Then we'll handle it. Step by step, together." Silence filled the barn, not empty silence, but warm silence, filled with new understanding. Leah looked down, then up at Daniel, her expression calm yet full of unspoken emotion. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." A soft smile touched Daniel's lips, the kind that comes from deep relief. In the days that followed, Daniel and Leah began to plan small changes to make her life more comfortable. Daniel cleared a larger space in the barn for her to rest. He collected soft blankets and cushions. He built stronger beams and supports so she could move around safely. Leah helped him gather wood, seeds, and water, making the farm more productive than ever. Slowly, the farm transformed not into a place of fear or hiding, but a shared home where two very different people found comfort and friendship. As the seasons changed, their bond grew deeper. Daniel learned that kindness could create miracles. Leah learned that trust could rebuild a heart that had been hurt for too long. Together, they created a life that felt peaceful, meaningful, and full of quiet hope. And in that small corner of the world, far away from noise and fear, a giant girl and a humble rancher found a place where they truly belonged, not because the world allowed it, but because they chose to believe in each other.